Okay, one camera's on already.
I don't know if you guys had any bad windstorms down in Albuquerque, man, but it's been bad here.
It's been horrendous.
Yeah.
I planted garlic and peas and carrots, a whole bunch of stuff, and I haven't put the tomatoes out because they'll just take a beating.
We are live. All right.
Oh, yay!
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, guys. Thank you for joining us. You are watching KUHS, the stream on Melody Drive. This is the Weekend Boost, and I'm your host, Paul Lane. Hey, guys. I've mentioned before, I'm going to mention again, we are looking for sponsors on our show. If you sponsor the Weekend Boost, your ad will be featured throughout the week and reach a minimum of 100,000 people in the Denver area. Definitely a great opportunity. Restaurants, small businesses, we have a great audience. We have a varying audience, and we'd love to feature you on our show and on the station. With that, guys, you know I'm the author of the Caregiver's Handbook, the self-help love story, and I love to read, and so that's kind of why I'm on this show. We have had so many good guests on this show, and a lot of our guests are very, very powerful, and some of them are extremely powerful, and my guest today is one such guest. If you remember a few months back, we did Irene with Wolf Medicine, the story of Dr. Irene Blea, her autobiography, and it was a very, very good read, an excellent read. Irene's not one that sit around and wait for things to happen. She's a shaker and a mover, and if you've ever had a conversation with her, you'll see that this is a person who is really making things happen, not just in her community and the Latino community, but in the world. And you know, my slogan on the show is, if you can't, everyone's looking for a hero, and if you can't find one, be one. And with that, I am going to introduce Dr. Irene Blea.
Thank you, Paul.
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning. I have been wrapped up in one of your latest works, the Daughters of the West Mesa. It's a fiction story about a true events that happened in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I couldn't put your book down. I read it to my wife every night and every day, and I'm not kidding you. She'd wake up in the morning and she'd say, let's read. So I will say this book is not only a nail biter, it's a page turner.
Wonderful.
And you lived through this. This is fiction, but it's very, very real.
There are only two elements of fiction in the book. One is that I decided to fictionalize the characters because the young women who had been murdered and discovered buried, along with an unborn fetus on the West Mesa, had already been maligned in the media and through gossip in the neighborhood. So as I moved around my neighborhood, I would hear people say, well, where were the parents? Why weren't the parents vigilant? Why weren't they must have had terrible parents. But I came to know those parents, and most of them were concerned and had tried to report their daughters missing. Mm-hmm. So I fictionalized the characters just to protect them. The other thing that is fictionalized is the detective that comes
Black.
to work with Dora. Mm-hmm. So he's totally made up. I had to make him up from from the stroke of a pen.
Mm-hmm. So as the story unfolds, there's a woman named Dora who has two daughters, Andrea and Luna. And Luna is a very independent young lady who really doesn't want, I know young people go to a point where they no longer want things to do with their family, and she's gotten to this point, and she's become very rebellious with Dora, her mother. And Dora's a very prude woman. I have to say, she's a woman who wouldn't even say damn. She wouldn't say any curse words at all. And when Luna becomes more and more involved in her other life, she starts calling these other people her family. And as as you read the story, you just can't help but feel compelled to want to reach out to Dora and just give her a hug, a supportive hug. How did this character Dora come about? Was she a real person?
Dora is actually myself. Is me.
Ah, okay.
I did come home to hear the helicopters, but didn't pay much attention. When I turned on the news, there was the story.
Man.
But Paul, I had a daughter that was a heavy metal band, and I would have nightmares really for years that the phone was ringing, or there were officers at my door. The doorbell was ringing. Mm. And they were going to tell me that something horrendous had happened to my daughter. Mm-hmm. She had been kidnapped, raped, or otherwise damaged. So I took that energy and that fear and put it into Dora. Mm-hmm. But Dora is also a woman who has struggled out of poverty, has raised these two girls alone. And so she's a very strong character, but over the months that I spent involved with the parents of these women, I saw how they deteriorated. They went from being physically strong. Some of them lost weight. So there was a deterioration, and I had a horrendous accident, a work-related accident. So that work-related accident is actually my
when Dora fell. Yeah, that was intense. That was. I want to just touch on this one topic, and I talk about it a lot on my show, and that is internalization of inferior status.
Yes.
And Andrea did not want to live in this nicer neighborhood, and it was so interesting when she says, "I don't want to live like the gringas. I want to live with my own people," and it was powerful for me because I was that kid. When my mom wanted to move into a nicer neighborhood, I rebelled. I was very, very resistant to it, and I didn't even know why. I didn't know what I was resisting or why, but I looked back on it, and as I read those words, it made me feel very connected to that situation. So I just wanted to just point that out because it was very, very revealing to me.
I understand that. A long time ago, I started off as a Chicano movement poet, and I wrote a poem about you like it in the barrio, it's safe there, you can handle it. And the whole poem is about how it's easier to stay where we are sometimes, even though it doesn't have the trappings of mainstream society. And once we adjust, there's many ways to adjust, but one way to adjust is go out, get your education, make your money, and return. So Andrea's one, she's like me. I live in the barrio. I can afford to live other places, but I love my people. I love the Spanish language spoken in the grocery stores. I just like the ambience. There's color here, not just racial, ethnic color, but the houses are different colors. and we have a barrio dog now, and I've got a poem to him. He's a wonderful dog, but he's nobody's dog. He's everybody's dog.
The barrio dog.
And so we can get very comfortable there. And some people learn to hate it and move away and never want to go back.
Yes. That was an interesting dynamic, a part of the book. I had a thought and it just slipped my mind. About how the media classifies and judges and You know, Dora was listening to a talk radio one day, and she was hearing this Anglo talking about how these women were whores and they were drug addicts, and you know, and he was just further pounding the nail, and you know, he was just aggravating the situation, and it was just really harmful to, I guess as a reader, to me it felt like he was just antagonizing. He was not helping anyone.
It was a painful experience. These are young women that entered prostitution. And there's an addiction that takes place to lifestyle, and it's not that they like it, they get entrapped into it. The average age at that time for a young woman to enter prostitution in Albuquerque was about 15 years old.
Oh.
And I can't imagine that has changed very much. But these young women kind of strayed off the narrow path, excuse me, so to speak, and they were maligned. All of them were thought to be prostitutes and drug addicts, and some were drug addicts, some were not. Some were just kind of, there was a couple of them who were kind of wannabes, you know. They weren't quite in the life yet. So I would hear these comments, not only in the media, but out in the community, standing in line for a movie.
Oh, yes.
And what was painful about that was that you and I know racism exists, and so does sexism. But this was just blatant, absolutely blatant. And in fact, one phrase that came to my mind while I was doing this was disposable women.
Exactly.
And there are some women that are deemed disposable. Highly amongst them are the missing and murdered indigenous women,
Yes.
Native American women. In fact, this book drew me into the missing and murdered indigenous woman movement, and it was not something that I expected.
Oh man, I bet that's another show.
Yes,
there's so
yes.
many murdered indigenous women and men that are coming up missing on an annual basis, that and they don't prioritize them. It seems like they are, like you said, they're disposable. They're not integral parts of the community that they would even make an effort to watch out for, or to seek, or to search for.
Right. You know, I met Mr. Dan Valdez, and he would do things like, he couldn't sleep, so he'd get up at night and get in the car and drive southeast Central, which is the war zone here in Albuquerque. It's called the war zone.
Wow.
Looking for his daughter. Now, that's a man that's highly invested in her. He had taken her to 2 or 3 drug rehab centers. One time he took her to Arizona because he didn't want her to go back to the life here in Albuquerque. And he told me this story that they walked in the door when she was dismissed, and he brought her home, and she said, "Dad, I'm going to get a glass of water." Went to the kitchen and walked out the back door and was back at it again. So it's not that, I think parents sometimes are helpless. There are some bad parents, Paul, you and I know that.
Yes, yes.
But sometimes when young people get to a certain age, you just can't control them like you once did.
Yep.
And there's that old adage about you can take a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. That came up in my mind as I wrote the book, because some of the parents tried really hard, and it was not unusual for a young woman to be gone for 2-3 weeks, sometimes 3 months, and then appear at the home. And so some people took longer to report their daughter missing, and some reported it 3 or 4 days after her disappearance. So there was no one scenario that colored the story, and that's why I decided to write it, because it was complex. It took Albuquerque, it gripped Albuquerque, And it still does, because it is still an unsolved serial killing.
Throughout the book, they keep coming up with new bodies. At the point they were digging deeper than the cab of the backhoe, 9 feet deep and deeper. And I mean, that's a huge mystery. Why would they do that? Why, like they asked in the book, was there someone that might have been a construction worker that killed these women? Was it, I mean, there's so many questions unanswered.
Yes, that area where the bodies were found was being developed for a home. They were building. They wanted to build homes on that piece of land, and it is my conjecture that perhaps some of those machines turned over some of the bones, because there is a very strong conviction that there are more women out on that mesa, and that's why they went so deep. Mm-hmm. They used it. Albuquerque learned a lot because they used ground penetration at first, and then they just dug they dug so deeply it just didn't make sense.
Wow.
And even today, it doesn't totally rest easy on my mind.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the feelings that was perhaps the construction workers might have discovered bones and just reburied them.
They didn't want to stop the progress of
that
the
was
job.
One thing that did make sense. So, but that gives us such a dim view of
Mm-hmm.
of people, don't you think?
Oh, it's sad. It's just almost a hopelessness that, jeez, I don't know.
It was a very hopeless feeling when they would dig up. By the way, the first bone that was found by a dog.
Yes.
That was found by a dog.
Rika.
A woman here took her dog for a walk, and he found a bone, and she took a photo of it, and it was determined that it was a human bone, and that's how the whole thing was discovered.
Wow. Wow.
It gripped us, literally gripped this community.
I can't even imagine. I mean, you're right close by it. It seems like you were pretty close to the dig site, and I mean, so it's very likely that the victims and the perpetrator walked right by your backyard at some point.
Yeah. Well, let me correct you on that just a bit. I lived kind of northeast of the site.
Oh, okay.
But my second cousin bought a home on the other side of the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I came to know that it was right on the other side of his wall.
Wow.
And much later, a woman told me that she had bought a home on the established side of the community on the east side of the wall. And she and her husband went to plant a tree, and they had dug up some bones in trying to plant this tree, and they became fearful. They covered him up, and they were renting, actually, I'm sorry. And when they moved, they just never made a big deal of it. But and then she disappeared. She was a waitress at one of the Mexicano restaurants that I go to, and she disappeared. So I don't know if I think she moved out of the state or something, but she was no longer employed, and they had no further information on her.
Wow. Wow.
And there were several theories, as you mentioned, Paul. One, that perhaps the killer was a rogue cop. Another was that it was a biker initiation ritual. And a third was that maybe it was somebody who visited Albuquerque periodically, and in fact they even tied it at one time to the balloon fiesta and then to the state fair, and then those theories fell by the wayside.
Mm.
So we still don't know who did it.
Wow. At one point she contacted a shaman, or she reached out to
Yes.
a shaman. And I have friends that would be very averse to that, would never accept that. But I mean, when you're at a point where you're in that desperation, you're going to reach out. I would reach out to any resource that I could find, to no avail. Through the book. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add, we had spiritual healers that came as far as Mexico, from Mexico, to conduct rituals, and I went those those rituals that take place by the wall with all the wind and the sand blowing. I was actually there.
Wow.
And they were very powerful, extraordinarily powerful. They were held close to sundown, and of course there was sage and the conch shell and a whole lot of things that happened. But it was a scary time sometimes for me. Because let me tell you what happened, Paul. My book was released on a Wednesday, and on a Thursday morning, my cousin called, the mother to the young man that lived over by the site. She said, "Tell me this man is not related to us." And I said, "Pat, what are you talking about?" She said, "Do you have the newspaper?" I said, "Somewhere. I haven't looked at it." And on the top half of the front page, which you know is a very important section of the paper, the headline read, "Blea suspected in West murder mystery."
Oh.
And I just could not believe it. I just could not believe it. And they had a suspect who was finally determined guilty of 3 rapes on teenage girls and is serving a 99-year term in prison now. But they were tying him to the West Mesa murders, and I just could not feel that was coincidental. It was just too weird, and strange things happened to me, Paul. I went one day to do a presentation for the Tony Hillerman conference, one of the keynote addresses, and I walked in, and it was about this time of the morning, and one of the women who was coordinating the conference that ran, and she said, Dr. Blair, there's a man here, and he wants to talk to you." And I asked her, "Well, what's it about?" She said, "I don't know, he didn't say, and he's standing over against that back wall." So I went there, and this nice, well-mannered man stepped forward, and he said, "Hello, Dr. Blair, I'm Detective so-and-so, and I've been following you." And a chill ran through me.
Wow. Yeah, why a suspect?
And what he had been doing, he was following the release of my book because he wanted a copy. Men would appear at my book signings, and they'd sit away from the crowd, and they would take a profuse amount of notes. And some of them could have been undercover, and some of them looked a little scary, more scary than that. And so it was just a very strange time in my life personally, and in the life of this community.
There was an antagonist throughout the story, her friend Della, and I ain't gonna lie, she was irritating. I mean, every time Dora wanted to hang up on her and just, "I don't want to talk to you," and so her character always seemed to keep Dora on her toes. Always, I don't know. She was a real pessimist in many ways. I mean, she would always call and say, "Do you think it could be? You don't think it could?" And it was like, "Oh, shut up."
She would plant all these ideas in Dora's head.
Yes, it was just terrible.
And that was the nature of the dialogue in the community. Who did it? Why did they do it? And they blamed the women.
Oh, that's disgraceful.
They are not without fault, okay? Because people make choices. But the way the mystery was being unraveled was to blame the victim.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what was happening.
That's exactly what we do in a patriarchal society, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm ready for female leadership, and don't get me started on this one. But yeah, I just believe that the patriarch has run its course in this country and in this world, and we're seeing it all over in all stretches of the country and the world, and the male ego is destroying us. Another book.
Well, it's become dysfunctional.
Truly
given the social milieu of our country right now, it's become somewhat dysfunctional, and I'm not real sure what we can do to get that back, because there will always be opportunistic people who would take advantage of the victims, but in their dysfunctional thinking. And so it's ingrained into the fabric of society, unfortunately.
It was so disturbing that all through the book, she was worried about all the people that were, looking down on all these murder victims, and they were judging them, and I mean, it's like you can't get a break. People, we go through life and we have bad things happen to us, and we find ourselves on the, on the down low and on the bottom side, and it's like, someone, give me a break. And it just seemed like these young women could not get a break, even in the afterlife. It just seemed so brutal, the reality of the society we live in. It was painfully clear.
It really was. One of those television shows, I think it's Unsolved Mysteries, came to the city, and all that did was flare up a bunch of fear and more gossip and finger pointing, and it was very disruptive.
Wow.
But it did get the issue some national media attention, and in some places even international. And that was very important, because it helped kind of pressure our police force to do more and to be more vigilant. The FBI was involved. Some of the highest technology was involved, and so the city learned a lot about crime and crime solving. But it came to define the city to some extent, and it's something we live with, and every February there's an article in the paper kind of paying attention to the fact that it still exists as an unsolved murder mystery.
Wow.
By the way, 9 of those young women were Hispanic, Chicanas. One was Native American, and the last one was a very young black woman, and she became kind of a spurious factor in the investigation because she didn't fit the profile. The Native American woman looked like a Chicana, where the Chicanas looked like the Native American, and so it was a racially ethnic targeted murder mystery.
Wow.
And because our women hardly ever get that kind of attention, at the same time, 9 young blonde women went missing, I think it was in Maine, and they got a lot of national attention. And therein was a comparison for me about who gets the attention on the national media.
Wow, that's a hard reality. It's very.
It was painful.
Yes, I mean, it's almost like, what about us? I mean, we're people too. I cannot imagine the frustration that must have been felt in the community there. It had to be just really painful.
It was, and it was very frustrating to me, to the point where I would listen and take notes in my journal. I did not plan to write this book. I was working on the 3rd book of my Susanna trilogy. And after a while I saw that I had copious amounts of notes in my, or notations in my journal, and I thought one day to just type them out and see if they were linked in any way. And I realized, oh my gosh, I have an outline for a book. So I started writing the book, and the 3rd book on the Susanna trilogy was almost 2 years late. But I did get this book out, and it's been instrumental in keeping the topic in the ear of the city of Albuquerque.
Yes, this story needs to be kept alive. It's important
that we not forget.
Yes, keep it alive.
And there was a park finally established on the site, and there were 12 trees planted, and And it all happened very quickly. That all of a sudden there's an article in the newspaper that said that the trees had been planted, and nobody knew. Those of us who were involved were never told that that was going to happen.
Wow.
So I still feel like there's an effort to silence us on that topic, but it's not going to be silent because it's there. And it's called a memorial park.
Wow. So they're not developing on that property now?
No, in fact, the company that owned it donated it back donated it to the city. Because nobody wanted to live there.
No, yeah, it would just be really terrible.
And you know, one time I went, right before they started working on the park, I went to visit the site, and I come from a culture that leaves three small stones at a gravesite. So I went to pick up 3 small stones and was going to put them on top of the wall when I saw that on the curb there were 2 sets of 3 small stones. So other people were feeling the same way.
Oh man. There's got to be a collective grief that just overtakes you. As I read the book, my heart would just almost cry for, the families of those missing young women, and, even the whole community as it grieved and as it mourned this loss, at least the Latino community. And I don't want to sound like there's not that some people don't care, but, we have a special place in our hearts for people who look like us. It's just nature.
We do. We're highly invested in our communities. And that's the reason why I decided to finally publish the book, and that's how I got involved in the story. I went to one of the rallies, and I met Mr. Valdez there. And by the way, Mr. Valdez, I know he died of a broken heart. Mm-hmm. He died not fighting to keep the investigations going, mm-hmm. and it was very sad. But he and I would talk, and the authorities were having a hard time managing the families and managing the communication, because they were accustomed to dealing with a mother and a father in a murder case. But when they had community, when they were going to have information sessions for the families, the tios and the tias and the cousins, all the primos and primas, and even some vecinos would show up, and instead of dealing with 11 or 12, maybe 15 people, they would have 28 and 30 people. Mm-hmm. And they didn't know what to do with that, and some of the FBI people didn't understand it.
Yes.
And so we had to talk about collective grief and collective interest and collective entitlement to what happens to our community.
That's a very, very
so
powerful
it opened
word.
up a whole lot of different things for me to think about, not only as a writer, but as a person, as a human being.
No doubt. Throughout the story, she has this kind of, and I don't want to say relationship, but she has this news reporter, Tom Romero, that she always liked his presence. She always liked his words. It was always soothing to her. That was an interesting dynamic in the story. I enjoyed that. I appreciated that.
Well, a few years prior to that, we got a new newscaster in the city, and the women were just, oh, he's so handsome. So I thought I'd put him in the story. Albuquerque becomes a character in the story. And I decided to make Albuquerque a character because that's the city in which the story took place. That's the city that was being featured in all of these news stories. And there are a lot of fine things about Albuquerque, but it's a very unique place. And I think you might recall that there are signs along the freeway that this lawyer puts up. and he's still doing it, and he's still here, and he's still on television, and those are things that make Albuquerque Albuquerque.
Mm-hmm. And it's good that there are people that are still vigilant, and people, they haven't let this be forgotten, and they shouldn't, and I until you told me about this, I had never heard of these women disappearing, and once I started reading the book, I became just, as I mentioned, I was enthralled. I just wanted to see what happened next, and it was just heartbreaking to see, how Dora developed fibromyalgia, and how she had that really bad fall, and
Yes.
her daughter was trying to help her up, and she was just lost. I can't even imagine the heartache and the grief, and just so many emotional roller coasters that the community must have felt and still feels throughout.
Well, I took Dora, and I thought, how would I have felt had my daughter gone missing?
Mm-hmm.
And these stories are rampant in the community.
Mm-hmm.
And not knowing if she was alive or dead and buried in that field.
Man.
And that would just have been total destruction for me. I think I would have had to reconceptualize my life
I can't
in
even
order
imagine.
to go on.
Yeah, I just can't imagine. Yesterday. Oh, please go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Well, I was just going to add that after I wrote the book, I stopped having nightmares about my doorbell ringing or the telephone. I didn't even have a telephone then. I had a cell phone, and all of that stopped.
Wow. So there was some healing.
It was cathartic for me.
Very, very cathartic. Yes.
In many ways, yes.
Wow, that's an interesting side effect. It kind of, you were able, like I tell my wife when she can't sleep, and I get a notebook, write down your stuff, and put it down, and release it, get it on paper, because you holding it in is just doing you harm. It's just like eating poison. I mean it. It's just terrible.
I think that's the power of art.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's writing or painting, singing, dancing, it helps relieve the body, the mind, but the soul, the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
It helps relieve one of that. When I wrote, I think I told you that when I wrote Irene with Wolf Medicine, I relived everything.
Oh.
And there were times when I was weeping and typing. And the same thing happened with this book, Daughters of the West Mesa.
Mm.
I actually wept and typed at the same time.
Oh, I could see it. I could definitely see it. Your words were, they were very gripping. I just felt like, like my little sister's over there hurting, and I want to hurt her. I want to help her. I don't want her to feel this. It was just a feeling of just pain, of just a really empathetic pain for me, as I read the book, and why I highly recommend it. Now, this book is only available as an ebook right now. Soon, hopefully
Yes.
soon to be released as a hardcover or a paperback.
Well, it was released in paperback. All my books get released in paperback because I want people to read.
Yeah.
I like sharing my life, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Paul, just yesterday, I regained the rights to my book,
Right on.
to Daughters of the West Mesa. It was my publisher died unexpectedly and left no instructions on what to do with the author's work and how to get our work back to us.
Oh.
So three of my books became tied up in her estate for 2.5 years.
Jeez.
2.5 years. And just yesterday, I got an email from Ingram Sparks that said that they were transferring the rights to my books back to me. But I had to provide death certificate and obituary.
Gee.
Pretty much had to give my life away to get my book back. But it will soon be back in a hardcover or a paperback so that you can buy it, and I'm going to try to get them on Amazon as quickly as possible, because it's very difficult to read this book, I understand, on your cell phone.
Yes.
That it just demands this concentration, and the book is so, I understand, is so concentrated and so impactful that the cell phone almost doesn't do the kind of justice that some people have reported to me. So
yeah, you know, and I'm a highlighter.
And I just got the email. I don't have the rights. I don't have control of the rights yet, but they are going to be transferred back to me. They have been transferred legally.
By the way, you have another book that's coming out very soon that's already been released. It's a poetry book.
It's a poetry book. I told you that, you know, I started as a Chicano movement poet, and every year I am an avid gardener. I mostly grow flowers and a few vegetables, but every year to my yard there comes one golden dragonfly. Now those golden dragonflies are abundant in the city, and my daughter would have 30, 40 of them, and I never got any. So because Albuquerque has several microclimates. But one golden dragonfly would come, and that golden dragonfly would land and pretty much stay in the same place for about 3 or 4 hours. So every summer in late June, I wait for the golden dragonfly, and therefore is the title. And
cool.
Have you seen the title? Have you seen the book yet?
No, I saw your announcement of it. Oh yes, I did. I did see the cover. Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, I just ordered 75 copies. I'm going to Denver, Paul. I hope to meet you in person.
Absolutely.
Because I love you and your work. I really do.
Well, thank you.
And I'm going to launch the book in Denver on May 4th, I think 1 o'clock at the Corky Gonzalez Library.
Yes.
And I'm also going to be in Pueblo on May 1st.
I think I have that already in my calendar here. Let me double check.
Yeah. So I'm excited
to
return to Colorado because I love Colorado so much. But I was born and raised in New Mexico. I actually only lived in New Mexico until the age of 7, and then entered public school, Spanish speaking, in Pueblo, Colorado. So it's always nice to go. I call it home. I feel like I have 2 home states.
Yeah.
Colorado and New Mexico.
You know, I have a daughter that lives just up the hill from Chimayo.